Your job is to work for your schools.
And it's not me, it's the voice of the Big Ten. It's 18 athletic directors and coaches who have to be convinced that this is fair. We're not asking to be handed anything. Like, we want to play tough play-in games to get there, and we want to create an incentive for our schools to schedule more non-conference.
Why that model?
We think bigger is better. I think 12 is not enough. Look, as great as college football is, and it's great, I want more teams to feel like they're chasing that opportunity to compete for a national championship.
Joining me on this episode of Big Noon Conversations is the Big Ten Commissioner, Tony Petitti. All right, welcome into another Big Noon Conversations here with the Big Ten Commissioner, Tony Petitti. I appreciate you joining me, my man. Listen, the first time we got a chance to do this, you were like brand new. We were sitting at the Terranea for, I think, what was it, the Big Ten spring meetings or something along those lines?
And actually, it may have been a Fox production meeting.
That could be right.
I think it was a Fox production meeting.
That could be right. But you were brand new on the job, and now almost 3 years later.
Just a little more than 2.5, yeah.
And here you are. I would love, before we get into, and this is going to be a lot of playoff discussion, in particular with models, and there's been a lot talked about this summer from every different conference. So what we wanted to do is allow you to come here and really, give your perspective on what you think the future of the playoff should be. But before we get to that, I would love for you to just, think about those 2+ years and what you've been through and what we're dealing with now in college football. How has it been so far?
Yeah, it's been pretty remarkable. And you're right. The paint was still wet when I sat down with you. That's for sure. That first interview out there with a great backdrop. And look, I think it's been remarkable. First of all, I'll say the job is an absolute privilege to be able to do this on behalf of the Big Ten and our administrators, presidents, all the 10,000 plus student athletes. It's just been absolutely remarkable. Privilege and responsibility. So I start with that. And then secondly, so much has changed in the landscape of college athletics. You were talking about the future back then, about what was going to happen. And, we have this historic settlement that was just approved just a couple of weeks ago. So we're getting ready to implement that. You think about the different success, we added Oregon and Washington, the league got bigger. There were so many different things going on. The efforts down in DC, it's been a lot. I really think about it sort of almost like two jobs, which is like the daily running of the conference, which is a lot. The stage, our 28 sports, and run championships and officiating and scheduling and dealing with media partners, the traditional job that commissioners have had. And then on top of it, just these incredibly, global, huge changes in the structure of college athletics. That's like almost like a separate thing that has been, and one of the things most rewarding about that has been the collaboration with the SEC, Greg Sankey, the ACC, Joe Phillips, and Brett Yormark at the Big 12. Like, to make a change like that, it just requires so much collaboration, because it's as big as the Big Ten is, we can't do that stuff by ourselves. Sure. So that part's been really rewarding.
And there's no easy answers. I mean, all of that stuff is so complex, and there's so much going on within all of that. And we're all excited to see, what the future holds in terms of the College Sports Commission and with the House settlement and the revenue sharing and this new model. I'm optimistic. Maybe we can touch on that a little bit later. And then kind of last thing before we get into the playoff, not only have you been dealing with all of those things, but doing it really well, but also a lot of success on the field. You're 2 for 2 on national championships. You roll in here and here, Michigan wins a national championship. Ohio State wins a national championship. It has to be rewarding for you.
Yeah, it really is. It's great for everybody to be a part of those campuses, and you get to work with those coaches and what it means for when the Big Ten wins, everybody rallies behind. Like, it's a really interesting job. When you're playing conference games, you're kind of stone-faced. You're on the sideline. You can't indicate any emotion. You make sure the colors are gray and black and don't reflect any school colors. Yeah. But then when you get into these non-conference games, like, you're living and dying just like the people on campus are. And so you're rooting really hard. So that's been incredibly rewarding. And there's a side benefit. The more we win, apparently the more IQ points you get, and it's just like
the better job you're doing.
Yeah, apparently, all those wins matter in terms of some of my job performance, I guess, on the outcome of games, when you're sitting there. And so you try to put people in position. Like, I think we've done a good job of trying to, provide the resources and the support to let our coaches and student athletes do what they do best. And we've been really blessed the last couple of years, and to go through that first CFP with 11 games, and we played in 8 of them. Yeah. And in one game we had 2 teams playing. So it was a pretty remarkable, run, and it was great for the conference, and a real, confirmation of the quality of football we're playing from top to bottom.
Your goal, and I've talked with Greg and Brett and Jim, all the commissioners about this. Your job is is to work for your schools.
Correct.
And to put them in the best position to succeed, and yet here we are collaboratively trying to create a system to crown a champion,
That's right.
And it's difficult because there isn't that one person that,
That's right.
is overarching over everything. So I would love, let's backtrack objectives. As the commissioner of the Big Ten, what are your objectives for the future of the CFP and its format?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is it goes right back to representing the Big Ten, because that's my job. There isn't a commissioner of college football, like you pointed out. So each of us, when we get in that room, we are looking at trying to work together to come to the right solution for all of us. But ultimately, my job is to represent the 18 institutions in the Big Ten, our football, our coaches, our players, the way we do things. And so it's really important to represent that. And we start from the place that we're always not going to be aligned on that. There might be different ideas in different conferences. We have an obligation to try to come together to work these things out. But like the goal for me, like right from the beginning, and I really felt strongly about this, and maybe it's my experience coming from MLB, where you have that one entity. I really believe that you've got to have a postseason format that makes the regular season better. So I start from that. I want more teams to feel like they're chasing that opportunity to compete for a national championship. Teams can get hot late in the season. The fact that they lose a game early shouldn't disqualify them. Those type of things. So to play more meaningful conference games as late as possible. I think you see that in the professional sports model. They try to keep as many teams alive for as long as possible. And especially when you get into a world when you condition fans to think about this great new playoff that we've created, they're gonna focus on achieving that. And so to the extent that teams don't have the opportunity to get there, it's going to eventually, hurt. And so we want to make sure we have the interest that teams can break through, have a remarkable season, qualify, and play. And we just believe strongly that, conference record is like the backbone of all of that. Like how you play during the season, qualify off your conference record. That's sort of the best way, we believe.
So that would be your main objective. If I could boil it down, it's you want to keep more teams relevant for longer in the season, playing meaningful games later in the year.
That's right. I mean, teams that finish, if you're sitting there in November and you've got a team, going in that's 5-3, playing a team that's 6-2 or whatever it might be. I mean, I look at Ohio State last year. Ohio State, lost 2 Big Ten conference games. Technically, they finished 4th in the conference at 7-2, and we're clearly by the end of the playoff run, we're clearly the best team in the country. And so I think it's an indication of like, it's hard to figure this stuff out during the course of a season. Who's playing really well? And one thing I'll say also, Joel, that's really important is like, even within the Big Ten, we've got, you have 17 available opponents. You play 9 of them. And so even within a schedule, like there's discrepancies in the strength of schedule. Like you just don't know, who's going to be strong, who not when you play them. Like, the rub of that, luck of that schedule when you play teams, who's healthy when you play them. And so, the idea we've had about, playing play-in games is a way to sort of accommodate the fact that we're not playing that much of a common schedule, even within the league, let alone trying to be compared to SEC, Big 12, and ACC. So, the idea of, having a championship game, where those 2 teams are in, and then playing our 6th team versus our 3rd and our 5th versus our 4th, which is the idea we've been talking about. I think it just is a way to also normalize your conference schedule, because it really is hard to sometimes tell the difference among our own teams, because a lot of times they don't play each other.
I think this is one of the unintended consequences of what's happened in the last 5 years with all the conference movement is not only now do we have imbalances between schedules between conferences in terms of league games played within the SEC and the Big Ten, or ACC and the Big 12, but now also you have the inequities within the conference.
Correct.
You've got, like, for instance, if you look at the SEC, last year, Florida and Oklahoma played a horrific schedule, as compared to others. People have pointed out that Indiana got a bit of a favorable draw in the Big Ten, but that's going to happen in a large conference. And one of the things that I think that we've got to do from an objective standpoint is really mark down. I've got 4 criteria. I love yours, and mine fits in with one of yours. I think that we need to increase fan base engagement, which it does exactly what you're talking about. Keep more teams alive later into the year. Yep. I think we need to increase the valuable or meaningful games that we play in college football, not decrease them.
Encourage them, actually.
Encourage them. That's right. And that happens, by the way, I'm talking about this in a postseason environment and in the non-conference environment. Because I think both of those,
they go hand in hand.
They do go hand in hand. I think we need to minimize the power of the committee And lastly, I think that we need to maintain more conferences being relevant. So with those objectives, and more specifically your objective in terms of keeping more teams alive, what you have put forth, I guess, in your idea and your model is a 16-team playoff with a 4-4, 2-2, 1-3. Now, all of you listen to the Joel Klatt show, I've broken this down so it sounds intricate. 4 automatic spots for the Big Ten and the SEC, 2 automatic spots for the ACC and the Big 12, 3 at large, 1 for the Group of 5, and then Notre Dame falls in that at large pool with those 3 spots. You kind of touched on some of the things that would achieve, including a play-in weekend. But let's just start at that model. Why that model?
Look, the first thing I'll say, and going back to why that model, you start with the committee. Like, we'll stipulate that the committee does the best job they possibly can. This is not about to sort of say that they don't do a good job. Like, they do the best they can, making incredibly difficult decisions based on data. Like, look, this year in the Big Ten, we'll cross over. I think we play 4 Big 12 games. We play 3 SEC, 3 ACC, and I think we have 2 Notre Dame games, if I remember all this correctly. It's not a lot of conference play among us, right, to have a body of work. So when you start comparing teams that don't have a head-to-head and you have very little, data to look at between matchups between the leagues and when those games are played and who matched up in them, so that becomes really difficult. So I start off with a stipulation. I think the committee is set up to do the best job they possibly can. I just think what they're being asked to do is so difficult. So look, I understand there was controversy about, how many AQs one league gets another. Let's put that aside for now. I think what we're trying to focus on is, at least within the Big Ten, we're not asking to be handed anything. Like, we're playing non-conference games. We want to play tough play-in games to get there. And we want to create an incentive for our schools to schedule more non-conference. Because if you're qualifying off your conference
record,
to
build a system that
increases
creates
more
tougher games.
Yeah, I want to play more. Look, we want to play. I think theoretically the goal is to play more non-conference games, because if you're qualifying for the CFP off your conference record and then a play-in game, the fact that you play a tough SEC or ACC or Big 12 team and maybe get beat on the road, or whatever the result is, that might impact your seeding down the road, but it's not going to impact your access. Like, there's 3 at-larges, so yeah, it does a little bit, but at the end of the day, that loss isn't fatal. Like, look, you can finish 7-2 in the Big Ten like Ohio State, and if you lost a non-conference game, or one of our schools finishes 7-2 and loses a non-conference, and they finish with a 9-3 record, they're in the tournament, because a 7-2 record is certainly going to get you into a play-in game in the Big Ten. So I think that's bringing everybody together, like teams knowing they can come. Because I think, look, as great as college football is, and it's great, there's just more on the table we can do. I think fans want to see these non-conference games.
I agree.
Earlier in the season. I think we can do more of it. I think everybody's pointing to at least at the beginning, the Texas-Ohio State game is going to get tremendous attention.
As it should.
Yeah, and we want more of that. We want to incent that and not create a sense of like where you're worried about, like, does winning that game help you more, or does losing that game hurt you more? And that's what coaches and ADs are going to be faced with deciding when they start to figure out, like, because it's tough. Like, look, this. You do our games a lot. Like, to get to 7-2 inside the Big Ten is a pretty remarkable record. That's not an easy accomplishment. And then if you stumble in a non-conference game, you're at the mercy of, deciding and making comparisons with other. I don't know
with
how you compare
criteria.
Yeah, I mean, I don't understand how you compare 10-win teams in one league to a 9-win team in another. That 9-win team could be clearly better. I just think it's very, very difficult. Mainly getting back to what I suggested, there isn't much head-to-head, and there really isn't a lot of crossover. At least in our league, because we play non-conference games, we don't play that many games against the SEC. We don't play, and I'd like to actually play more because I think it's just better for fans. But that's where it is. It's not without controversy. I know we've had this committee system in college for a really long time. I understand the idea about who gets what is controversial, but that's what we should do: get in the room and try to figure that out.
So, I agree with you overall. Now, there's some things that I maybe will disagree on.
And we're open to tweaking it. Like, it's not set in stone. This
Sure.
is like, there's plenty of opportunity to make this better if people have ideas. We're totally open to that.
But the baseline is building a system that goes from a selection-based model to an access-based model is what I think the direction we should be going. We should be trying to minimize the committee. We should be trying to encourage non-conference games. Right. We should be trying to create a defined path and access to the college football playoff, which then would create not only more meaningful games, but more fan bases engaged deep into the season. So it achieves all of the objectives to move to an access-based model. Now, one of the things that everyone immediately points out is then, well, why do you get 4 and the ACC and the Big 12 only get 2?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, look, we've made a decision about what we think is appropriate for us and what you should have on the at-large side, and it's based off of historic strength and where we think programs are. Could there be, methods to open that, other ideas that we would consider? I think we've been pretty open, and we just communicated this in a recent meeting we had, in the CFP room. It's like, look, we're open to ideas. If there's better ways to do it, or there's tweaking around the AQ system, I just think ultimately it's going to be very hard to sort of figure out how you expand the field, because the alternative, Joel, to this system is expanding the field and giving the committee more to do. Because if you go to 16 and you have 11 at large, you've just added even more decision making. And the answer is, well, at that point it gets to be easy because you'll cover everybody. No, because the more spots you put into the system, the more difficult decisions you're facing, because teams start to look more alike.
That's right.
They all have a tough road loss. Some of them may have stumbled at home in a tough conference game. The sequencing of when you play, you might be at a really difficult place and then have to go on back home and play somebody else, or be on the road for 2 weeks. Like, all of that journey is really relevant. And so I think you make it harder. So we're looking to kind of do exactly what you said, is reduce the role of the committee, let them focus on seeding, let them focus on the last 3 at-larges. Look, if everybody's playing games, look, I don't know how if there was a system, I don't want to speak for the ACC or the Big 12 or even the SEC about how they would qualify in an AQ world. But we've done some modeling that you could have somewhere between 40 and 50 teams after week 13 that are either in the play-in position or 1 game back. That's a lot of teams still alive.
That's a lot.
And some of them might be less realistic chances than others, but they're all sort of playing. And like, you don't want to get that mode where you lose that 3rd game and you're sort of not, because I worry that as the CFP gets better and better, missing it and where you go after that gets to be harder.
Sure.
Right. So you just want to make sure that, again, that we're opening up opportunities, qualifying off the field, and see where we go. But I also think, I think the play-in weekend, like, I'm only again going to speak for the Big 10, but you send some teams out there, do or die games, knowing that they have to win to make sure they're safe. Like, there could be some really great matchups around our championship game. That's a great weekend for college football. Like, the best way to market the sport is to play more good games.
That's exactly
you can talk about all
right.
the advertising campaigns you want. You can talk about all the slogans and all the promotion and everybody talking. But at the end of the day, what fans really care about is, like, put more good games in front of them, and they'll definitely watch.
I want to get to the maybe like 16 versus 14 in a second, and I also want to get to that 5-11 model that the Big 12 and the SEC kind of inexplicably threw out there. To be honest, I'll be honest, I'm in this not quite as much as you. You're a commissioner, obviously, but this is my profession. When that was thrown out, that was left field. When 5 and 11 was thrown out. Now, before we get there, I do want to just touch on this piece, because we'll put the committee to bed. Again, it's not their fault. But if you give the sport to the committee in a selection-based playoff, we're going to enter into a world where it is all propaganda and narrative, which we saw at the SEC spring meetings when they put out their propaganda packet, which, as just an observer of the sport, is frustrating, because it doesn't serve the purpose of the sport, And if we go to a selection-based model, aren't we just going to further incentivize conferences to drive into their silo and not look out for the whole sport?
Look, it can go either way. We have a great relationship with the SEC. We've done a lot of really good things together. I think what they do is they put out why they think they're strong. That's what leagues do.
Yeah.
So there's no negativity. Like, every league should make its own case. We make our case for why we want 4, and people may disagree with that. People may disagree with, different aspects of what our leagues think about their schedule. And look, they've got a great track record the last several years, just like we do. And so I know they feel strongly about what they do, and rightfully so. So there's no negativity to it at all. It's just like, look, we know that others will have different ideas. Just like we're an advocate for this system, there could be other leagues that think that 5-11 is better. There's no sort of how could you do that? It's like, okay, let's figure out how we actually, if we're going to do 5-11, tell me how we're executing it. How do you make it so the selection committee can actually do more when we think it's hard to do what they're doing already? And so that's where I focus. Like, if you're telling me you want 5-11, how many conference games are we all playing? And then secondly, after that, like, what are the criteria that we're using to make those determinations? How are they fair? How do you, because at the end, I don't think, Joel, we're talking about a system where we're going to spit all this data into a computer and it's going to spit out 1 through 16 and we're going to live with that. We're still talking about data that's used by people, right? And that just means it's subjective. And again, I stipulate they all are, they have great intentions. They're working their tail off. They're in that room. They're watching. They communicate with us all year long. They're doing the best job they can. But I just think that system is just hard to sort of, compare it to a system where we're playing on the field. But that playing on the field requires some differences and some, and a big change in the way people think about qualifying. But it does require you to play more tough games. There's no doubt about that. If you're going to play a playing game, you're adding a tough game to your schedule.
Was there any argument or reason or data point given in the recent meetings that convinced you at all that 5 and 11 might be feasible?
I said that the most recent meeting we had, and I've talked about this before, I'm open to any ideas. We said, look, we'll start off with the idea that, we've been a proponent for a certain system for about a year now. And obviously we want to hear other ideas if they are out there, and we'll study everything that's sent our way. We will study quickly. If we need independent help to evaluate it, we'll go get it. I just haven't seen anything yet. And then communicating back, and it's not me. It's not my voice. It's the voice of the Big Ten. It's 18 athletic directors and coaches who have to be convinced that this is fair to expand. And that's where we are. Is there something that shows that the metrics can be applied? We haven't heard anything yet. It doesn't mean that someone won't suggest something. We start off look, we think bigger is better. I think, 12 is not enough teams given the size of the teams that are competing. It's just, you look at professional leagues, they go somewhere between 40 and 50% of their teams qualifying for the postseason. We're way below that, even at 16, right? So I think we want to be really careful. We want to be open-minded, but I think we come in, skeptical might be the word. It's how are you going to make something back? Because when I talked to Ward, who was Ward Manuel, the AD at Michigan, was the chair of the committee. When I talked with him, which we've done a bunch, about, hey, did you feel like you didn't have enough? That's not what I get back. I don't get back from him hey, if only we had more data, we could do this even better. It's not that. It's hey, we have a lot already. At the end of the day, you're making comparisons, you're bunching teams together, and you're making a decision collectively with a bunch of other people who were working really hard. That's different than winning a game 31-27 on the field.
Yeah.
Right.
You've been a proponent of play-in weekend. I think that that's an incredible idea across college football. I would argue, let's say I was in the room, I would say 14 is better than 16 because 16 is redundant. That's what I've said on this show. I've said that it's a safety net that is unneeded because you have play-in weekend.
Yeah.
And you're basically creating a safety net for the third place team, and let's call it the SEC or the Big Ten, to lose at home and still get slid into the playoff. So is it redundant to have the 3 at-large spots?
I think it does a couple of things. One, it does protect a third-place team in the Big Ten who lost one game and gets caught at home in a close game and loses to have one more opportunity to get in. You're right. You want to call that redundant. It's definitely a safety net to get one more chance at it. But I think it does something else that you talked about before is it increases the chance of others from outside the A4 to get in if you have more at-larges. So ultimately, if there is a second, really strong team coming from the outside, it can come from anywhere. So you are potentially catching more. I think the 16 that we've heard about is playing some games, early, like a 16, 13, 15, 14 weekend, and then preserving the bye. I think one of the things that I really liked about 14 is rewarding 2 teams with byes.
Yeah.
And so if you can find a format with 16 that still does that, this way, when we're all playing these conference championship games, if that's what we end up doing, that there's really a lot at stake there. If you show really well, go in, win a game, it impacts your seeding, but playing for that bye really helps. It's a long journey to get to the end of the road here. You're playing a lot of tough games, and in our league, we're coming off I think all leagues pretty much that last weekend of the season is a big rivalry game.
Sure.
So you're just grinding, and then you're going potentially to a champ game and playing games. So I think having the catch-all maybe is a safety that everybody wants. I get back to the total number 16. I was originally like you. I was really more focused on 14. But then in talking to the guys about hey, opportunity to come, and it does provide some opportunities outside of the A4 to have a couple more bites at the apple there.
Trying to maintain relevancy for a championship game, a 1 versus 2, you would still need a bye. So you have to kind of flex that schedule, like you were saying. So 13 through 16 they play to kind of get you at 14 through 16.
There's some work to do on the scheduling is really tricky. Finding the right home for the windows to maximize the audience. You're up against some NFL competition at that time of year. So it's tricky. It's not an easy event to schedule. So there's some outside limits against that, and there'd be some work that we'd all have to do. But I think, look, we started with the idea of like thinking more about 14, but in some conversations we had early on with the SEC, 16 seemed to be something that, when we came together with them, that gained more momentum in our group after listening to their ADs.
In your model, you've said you'd be open to ideas. One of the ideas that I've heard thrown out is a 4-4, 2.5, 2.5 model, where basically there'd be 5 spots allotted to the ACC and the Big 12 rather than just 2. Because to them, and I've spoken with those commissioners, specifically Brett Yormark, and he said it's just a tough pill to swallow to say, hey, you're going to get half the spots that we get. Would you be open to a 2.5 model?
Yeah, look,
for those
I
conferences?
know I've read about that, but I haven't really. I want to be fair and be open minded and not kind of like preordain anything because it hasn't been presented. So like I haven't seen any real substantive conversation about that model. So I don't really know. Like I go back to the main position, which is send us whatever you want to send, and we'll look at it, whether it's the 511 or this idea that you just suggested or anything else that could be out there. Look, the right way to do this is to make sure that every league's there. Like, look, there still are 3 at large. So the 4-2, like there's an opportunity to get more than 2, and there's opportunity for us to get more than 4 potentially. So I think that's another reason why when you ask me like why 16, it does help with that initial thing. But look, again, depending on where you sit, you'll either, there are many people who will hate this. We've seen it, and I understand why it's the idea that, hey, we were starting from different places. But I do push back when people say you're not earning your spots. I think we're earning our spots playing 9 tough games and going through a really tough play. And I think that's earning your spot. I think a committee
I would say
selecting
it's more.
11.
I think it's more than the selection committee.
That to me is more of an
actually
invitation. You're actually getting invited by a selection committee instead of like, guaranteeing your spot by winning a game. But look, this is tricky. I'm optimistic that we'll find a path to work this out. There's a lot at stake here. And I think I think the principles of making the regular season better are really important because you don't want to get to a place where the postseason format's actually encouraging you to not play good non-conference games. Like that would be a really bad place to be. Fans love these matchups, and we got to play more of them, not less of them.
I think fans want to see, maybe Notre Dame have a different path versus just kind of, Notre Dame has this. And I was just spoke with Marcus Freeman not too long ago. Great guy, love Notre Dame. Notre Dame's great for the sport. There's no doubt, and yet there's always these carve-outs for them, and specifically for the playoff. As it expands and you're trying to make life more difficult on yourself with play-in weekends and maybe even, scheduling non-league games, what do we do with Notre Dame?
Yeah, look, I think, Notre Dame has got access. We've all agreed that they should have their path to access. I don't think anybody's suggesting that we change that for them. That's not something that they'd be obligated to do. We've, no matter what format change. And the process is, and the format changes, the Big Ten and the SEC have to come together and make a suggestion. And then the others weigh in. We take that feedback, decide what we want to incorporate. But there are certain parameters that are guaranteed. Like we can't come up with a format that says, for example, that the conference champions aren't in. Like that's not what we agreed to. So even with the discretion that we have together with the SEC, there are parameters that we agree to in certain things. And part of that's Notre Dame's access. And I'm fine with that. I'm not looking to relitigate any decisions we've made in the past. Like, people can argue about what their path is versus somebody else. I just want to do what's best for the Big Ten. And I think as a byproduct of that, I think I believe, and people can say we're wrong, I believe that it's better for college football overall. But everybody's entitled to have their opinion, and those other commissioners are going to represent their leagues really well, like they always do. And hopefully we'll come together and find something that makes everybody happy.
It was interesting because Coach Freeman said he would be open to and, in fact, encourage, his administration to join a conference if he felt like they were put in a position where they did not have equal access or direct access, or they were put at a disadvantage as it related to the postseason.
And they have a great path now, and that's fine. We've all agreed to do that. No one's suggesting we should change anything. Like they're a huge part of the ecosystem of college football, and the success. And look, they had a remarkable season last year, going down to the last game against Ohio State.
Yeah, it was a great championship game. This timeline. I know that the Big Ten and the SEC have, for lack of a better term, kind of the power with the MOU. Do you see yourself, and more specifically the institutions that you represent, agreeing to 5 and 11 at any point?
It's way too early because we haven't even seen a proposal of what it would be. We haven't seen like some key things. How many conference games is everybody playing? We haven't seen what the criteria to change the committee. I think, Commissioner Sankey was on record coming out of their meetings in Destin that they have to do work on the selection committee because their guys believe the same thing. If you're going to increase the role of a selection committee, I think I don't think anybody in the group, whether it's the ACC, the Big 12, or the SEC, or us, believe that you can keep it the same and that you would be okay with that. So I think we got to do work there. Look, I think we've shown with our ADs and our leadership group, send us ideas and we'll work as quickly as we can. Like I think we've shown that we'll pay attention whenever we're told to look at something, and we'll do the work as quickly as we can. With the goal of that, we got to make sure it goes back to the things that we care about, makes the regular season better, encourages more good games, is fair, and it reflects what we think we do in the Big Ten. Just like others think that what they do is really difficult. Sure. We think what we do is really difficult.
Yeah, that's right. Last thing on the playoff. What was your sentiment and the Big Ten overall, the sentiment about home games in the playoff? How did you feel like they came off, and would you like to see more in the future?
Yeah, I went to, I was fortunate to be at Penn State when they played SMU, and then go that night to Columbus to watch Ohio State play Tennessee, and the environments were great. I mean, home games were great. And look, the Tennessee fans traveled. That was some environment. It was, there were a lot of folks on both sides there, and I think that riled up the Ohio State fans that were there. It was a really great environment and obviously Ohio State got off to a good start in the game. So yeah, it was a great environment. I think there's a lot of back and forth. I think this is an area where there's like a lot of things to balance. There's the great tradition of the bowl games and staying connected to the bowl games, which is really important. And there's also coaches who say, hey, wait, I didn't get a chance to host a game. I was seated high, but I didn't get that chance. I think one of the things that will hopefully correct a little bit of the problems last year is going to the straight seating. I think that was a really needed change. I think it makes it tough when you're moving teams up and down a lot of lines based on parameters instead of like their real assessment. So that'll help. But I think more to come, and see how this evolves. There's challenges. Look, it was really interesting. Like, having worked on college football since the early 90s, this can be like, I think this year was the first time there were meaningful games played in cold weather. And both those games were very cold.
Yes.
And so at the end of the day, like, I don't think you've seen that. Maybe there's some cold weather games.
I think would give your conference an advantage.
Yeah. So, we understand, like, we're built for playing that way. It doesn't mean that others can't be successful in cold weather. Of course they can. But just in general, you just haven't seen that in college football, where all of a sudden you're lining up and it's 14 degrees. Right. And so that was unique. And so I think, we'll see how it goes. But there's deep commitment and respect for what the Bulls do for the game and the tradition. I think, I think we got to figure out the balance over time. But if you do go to 16, you are playing more campus games because you'll have more first round games. Yeah. So you may not have later round games, but you'll have more first round games. Well,
lots to figure out.
Yeah, a lot to do.
Is it exciting?
Yeah, it's great. Look, you're blessed when we get to work on something that people deeply care about. So that creates responsibility. It's a privilege, like I said before. And I feel obligated to do what's right for our coaches and our players and our institutions and our administrators. Like, everybody, we're in this together, and we want to be good partners. We want to collaborate with everybody. We want to listen. And that's why we say, look, send us the ideas and we'll consider them. We've worked really hard on ideas that we've had, and I understand where we are today. It doesn't mean that maybe it'll change. Maybe some other things will happen. We'll see. But I think that's.
You might get a memo from the Joel Klatt show. We might just start.
You guys might wait. Yeah, we got to give you guys a vote. Yeah, you got an idea? Send it our way. We'll study it.
I love it, Tony. Thank
you so much. Great to be with
you.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. With you. Yeah, great to have a chance to talk with you.
Good luck on everything. Because I will tell you this, just from everybody involved in college football, myself included, we're all just rooting for the best possible scenario and the best possible system. And I certainly trust you. I trust Greg and Brett and Jim. I mean, you guys are good humans and individuals, and you're going to look out for your institutions, but also the sport, and hopefully you land on something.
If we can figure out the house settlement together, we should be able to work this out.
That's right. I was going to say, house settlement is way more.
We were able to do that.
Than this.
We should be able to do this, right?
No doubt. Tony, thanks for your time.
Thanks, Joel. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it.